Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Melting Spot Podcast. I am your host, Isaiah Fecho, and today I am here with Matt Porter, senior producer and technical service manager of Monco Radio, and I guess our MSP department.
You know, really, it's a bigger title. It's the whole department kind of thing. And I work in information technology. We're in that division. So it's not necessarily just Monco Radio. Monco Radio is just a feather in that bird. So,
all right. So, Matt, you've really become one of the staple figures in the ATC building here. Unless you've been living under a rock, everybody knows who you are as soon as they walk through the building, or maybe COVID classes also. But my first question is here: how, when, and why did you get started at Monco?
I think that's really probably why most people know me. I've been here for 25 years. I started here, was the February of 1998 when the communication program, everything was kind of one big umbrella called communications. And that was the audio and the video and the theater, and everything was down in the PE building. And for those of you listening on radio, I just gestured over my shoulder to where the PE building is, the Health Science Center now. And we were on the second floor. And then I got a call. There was the man who was in charge at the time was named John Gallagher, and he said to me, "I hear you're the guy that knows all this stuff. Will you come down and teach classes?" Like, basically, when will you start?
And just to clarify, that would encompass SRT as well in that communications.
At the time, SRT didn't exist.
Yeah.
There was no MSP or SRT. There was audio and video, basically. Wow. And everything was under communications. And at the time, the main thing that I worked on was there was an intro to video class, but there was a woman, Bella Frizzell. She taught that. Neil Goldstein was here. Marilyn Shannock was running the theater program. But I ran a class called Studio, which was this big kind of multiple section course, TV studio, or it was just called Studio. And it had, if you were in it and you wanted to do audio, you'd be teamed up with somebody like Dalton who wanted to do video, and now you'd make a crew. So you might go out as a crew, you'd be in charge of the video, he'd be in charge of the audio, and you'd make these projects. And if you ever go back in the archives, there's a lot of projects. People go around the campus and do it. It was great fun. And you'd be on a team, a crew really. And I taught those sections. And it started out, there was 2 sections, and there was 3, then there was 4, there was an evening class and everything. And I taught the original, what at the time was COM 104, which was the intro to audio. And I always want to say digital audio. There was no digital audio at that point. We're talking, that's probably 99, 2000, and it was still reel to reel.
And were you using Pro Tools as a dog?
We didn't even have it yet. It was literally the first project in that class was we had a 4-track reel to reel. And if you can think about that in your mind, ready, 2 reels, and you recorded it onto there, and then when you wanted to make an edit, you would and you'd take your China marker and you'd make a mark on the tape.
Yeah.
And then you'd and there's your let's say, and you'd make a mark on the other side of the tape. And then you'd physically pull the tape out, put in the little block. Now you have 2 marks. You have the start of the and the end of the And you'd take a razor blade and you'd literally cut the tape on each side, take the piece of tape out, then tape them back together and hope that your edit worked. So you'd have this right, which was now this little piece of tape. And I always say, look, back then, I had a box of razor blades on my desk. If I had a box of razor blades on my desk now, they'd say, Matt, are you okay?
Yeah, I've heard Dave say the same thing. And oh my gosh, that's just, sometimes I like to think I'm an old soul, and then I hear stories about tape. and then I'm like, yeah, no, I'm glad I have everything in this.
The first project that I had them do was I would say onto a tape, 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, and so on. And then you'd come up, and if you were first, you would go 1, you'd make your edit, and at the end it should go 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And everybody would sit in the class and it was a great bonding exercise because 1, you got to see who was freaking out. 2, you got to see who was cool about it. But everybody would clap for each other. Wow, you did a great job. Fantastic. And I always felt like I look back on that kind of fondly because it was a way that really built a group. The class really joined together. And so thinking about that, we didn't have Pro Tools. It was a couple years before we had Pro Tools.
That's awesome. You guys were working on tape before any DAW. Even that's super cool. I mean, even Dave still like tries and shows us that stuff now, and it's like it's hard to fathom, like going in reverse, like thinking that way. Just how many steps are skipped now, having everything in the box versus back then. Like it's just ridiculous. And I'm sure over time probably
one of the main projects that we did was Montgomery County Community College on the Air, which was our weekly radio show. And when you think about that, it had to be 15 minutes on the dot. Couldn't be 14, couldn't be 16, it couldn't be 15 and a half. We played it on WNPV from those reels.
Yeah.
And you had to then time it on tape. So it really was a lot of kind of like now you put it on the timeline. If it says wherever it says 15:30, you just cut it, put a fade out, whatever. At the time, you had to go in and literally be fading it out. Like as the clock was going, you'd fade it out to get it to be the right length. So there was a lot. It was a totally different skill set than digital. And I mean, it seems like it's funny because I always think it doesn't seem like that long ago, but it really is a pretty good amount of years ago. But it's just totally different. I mean, I think, and everybody should probably at some point have to sit down with a reel-to-reel and do an edit just to appreciate what the digital editing is, I think. I mean, it might be a waste of time, but
I've seen Dave do it, and it's I'm only sure that after so much repetition of it, you just become like a tape cutting guru. You know what I mean? Like it's masterful to watch because like I do it and I'm like, okay, don't cut my finger. Make sure it's even. Like there's so many things that my brain has to go through that aren't natural to me yet. That like are just skipped like
Right.
that with the pros here.
Right.
And that's
Sure.
it's with that with like everything here. Just but. To go on from this, even though we are still using tape, how have you seen Monco grow as a school since that time?
You know, it really has been fun having started, like I said, in 98 because the technology was what was really taking off. Things like the digital editing. Like when I started, one of the things that I was very familiar with a program and a software and a piece of equipment called the Video Toaster Flyer, which was one of the first ever kind of affordable nonlinear editing. Like now you'd use, Premiere or whatever. The Flyer was the first of that. Back when you had 3 8 gig or 15 gig hard drives that were $1,000 each. Think about that. You have more, storage space in your pocket right now than what you had with that system. So the thing was, the college grew at a time when the equipment was becoming affordable. And the revolution was really on, you started to get digital audio and digital video and things like that into the masses. It wasn't anymore something that only existed in really high-end editing houses. And the college was always very supportive. That was, if you can imagine it at the time, there was only now we have this beautiful building. We only really had a handful of kind of offices that were fitted into studios. There was one recording studio. There was about 4 editing machines. So it wasn't nearly as big.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that really the college always really supported what was going on. And I was lucky probably very early on when I was had started, Dr. Karen Stout arrived. And she was a visionary, and one of her mantras was model and modern workplace. And they really started to grow the campus and revitalize the look of the campus and really and we grew along with that. And so when the time came in 2005 for this building, we broke ground on this in 2005, and this building came up out of the ground in 2007. And so even that, to me,
I'm older than this
it
building.
doesn't seem like that long ago, but then at some point you go, that's a number of years. But yet that was really exciting because all of a sudden you had this facility that we're in, these rooms. Eventually we had Monaco Radio got its own space, which was tremendous and which we still use today. The TV studio, we didn't have a TV studio when we were in the PE building. So that addition was huge. Thinking of things like that, it really has been amazing. I've felt very fortunate to have been part of that growth from, a much smaller program to a much bigger program. And we even talked about that a little bit, was it split into SRT and MSP really around that time. When they came up here, the program, they wanted more specialty. So it branched into, now you were originally like an audio or a video major. Then it became formally like SRT and MSP and, a couple different variations of that. But it's been really interesting. I've always felt very fortunate to be watching that growth and be part of what was going on. So.
Yeah, that it's fantastic. And I know the mix room was that in the past 5,
Mixed
6
room
years?
was only about 5 years ago. And the funny thing, if you go into like 129, and obviously anybody watching this video that doesn't know the geography of the building, 129 is the main kind of audio classroom.
Yeah.
145, which is now the mix room, was a video editing class.
Yeah, it was another class.
And
it didn't have that AC unit or anything. And
the room that has the AC unit was tech services. So imagine that. That small, what is now an HVAC closet, was tech services.
That's insane.
And we had everything. Now, we didn't have as much equipment, but there's another good example. The college has always supported us by getting us the equipment that we need. As the program grew, we need more cameras, we need more tripods, we need more lights, camera, action, and that equipment would appear. And it was through the fact that the college was very supportive of what we were doing. And when you saw that growth and you think about, what tech services used to be versus now we have a much bigger space down the hall. That was so those things in mind, that really, I think, shows a lot about the growth of the program, is that there was more students coming in, we got more equipment, we needed more space, and we got it.
Yeah, I mean, they deliver on your... I'd been around music my whole life, and up until here, there was... Like the gear here, I had not ever even come in contact with like some of the stuff I'd never seen a mixing board, but I played guitar growing up. It's just it is for anybody listening. If you're graduating high school and you like music or making stuff, I highly recommend. I don't have student debt. Think about it.
Well, and the other great thing is that, bigger than even music, the thing that I find is so amazing, and this is one of the things, a lot of time people come in and they look in the mix room and they see that big mixing, SSL 9000K, Dr. Dre, blah, 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 blah. But when you think about it, what's so exciting is everything that you hear in a movie or TV or on the radio or that cell phone ring, somebody made all that. There's so many jobs in this kind of field. And I always use the joke as an old dinosaur. I mean, I remember when it was channel 3610, 1729, 48, 12 if you moved the rabbit ears a certain way. Now, without even trying, think about all the outlets that you have for content.
That is a perfect segue.
Somebody's making all that. And think about every live venue you go to. Somebody's mixing that. Somebody created the music that's playing when you walk in the lobby. Somebody created the announcement, everybody please remain seated for the intermission. Somebody recorded all that. So I always like to say, especially like when these tour groups come through, make a note of everything you see and hear that's not created by God, that's a bird out the window, right? Somebody made that. And that person might as well be you, and that could be your job.
That is a perfect segue into my next question here. Now, one of the first things I realized upon coming to Monco. And I always was I tried to stay in tune with my creative side as much as possible on this side of the microphone, but I quickly learned that there are a lot of opportunities on the other side of this microphone. Like if you can go in and work on this microphone here, you can, I mean, it's not guaranteed, but you're going to have a guaranteed salary for the year. If you're an artist, you might need a certain amount of gigs. It's just, this place opened my eyes up so much to the amount of opportunities that there are in like technical services, like what everybody does here, whether it's film editing, engineering, recording, hosting a podcast. So my question here is, what advice can you give to anybody who wants to pursue either financial stability in these fields, like in the creative fields, or whatever they're looking to do that isn't a traditional job or going to a 4-year school?
You know what? The best advice, I think, almost life advice, but certainly for this kind of career, is be nice to everyone. Because first of all, you don't know who you're going to meet who will offer you an opportunity. The person that you meet that you held the door for somebody on the way in. It turns out, well, they run a production company, or that what happens a lot of time. Everybody, you think about, okay, we're near one of the largest network or one of the largest kind of populations in Philadelphia, as far as usually if you think about television studios and things like that, which is great. It's a major market, so it's right there. But you never know. Everything's out here in the suburbs. You don't know who you're going to meet. And a lot of time I always say, network with everybody, because it seems to be a much smaller world than you think when, oh, you're the guy that knows how to do this. And you're the guy, I'll testament to that myself. It's how I got here. Like I said earlier, he said, I hear you're the guy that knows this stuff. And if they remember you as, oh, I saw that thing you did with so-and-so. That's the first thing, and the first piece of advice I'd say, really, no matter what you're doing, if you're somebody who is pleasant and well-spoken and always be on time, be early, don't be late, because obviously you don't want to waste anybody's time. But I think that really comes down to that networking, putting yourself out there, connecting to people. That's probably the most important thing right off the bat.
And that is almost exactly one of the messages I'm trying to give with this Melting Spot podcast, is that we live in such a fantastic melting pot of an area with so many different skill sets, so much great geographical, locating.
Yeah.
I live in Norristown. I am in the center of everything. We live in a fantastic area to network with people and build connections, and it can take you all the way, or it can be what breaks you also. And it's mind-blowing.
It's most of life is that, you connect with people. I've never lived outside of this area. I've always been in this area or Philadelphia or whatever, but so I don't really know the rest of the country that well. I've never lived really in another part of the country, but I always do feel like we really do have a great spot here because in this area, we're kind of, it's obviously suburbs.
Yeah.
So it's beautiful. Even on my drive home, I drive through some really nice looking areas.
Fantastic.
So when you're around here, I just feel like this is a good area to live in. It's a good area to work in. But that really is the main thing, is find out what's out there. Find out who's in your area and make the most of those connections. So that's probably my best bit of advice.
And speaking of work, are there any students that you are still currently working with, or do you have any good stories of students? Or I know we talked about this a little bit, maybe any slightly horror stories or anything you're willing to divulge?
You know what the funny thing is? I've been here a long time, so I've met a lot of people. And there's a lot of them that I still stay in contact with because we do things like our Monco Radio alumni broadcast. So I keep in touch with them. A lot of it, I keep in touch with people via social media. I like to see what they're doing. It's funny because I tend to really not I don't like to dwell on the ones that gave me a headache. I always want to remember the ones who were really positive when they were here. And there's a long list of people who I can think of that are still working in the industry or have found something that makes them happy. On my bulletin board in my office, I have a note that was a student on graduation as he was walking toward the stage, pulled this note out from under his gown, and he gave it to me, and it says, "I came to Monco because of you. I saw you on a tour and realized this is where I wanted to be," and your enthusiasm, something like that. And I remember like thinking I was blown away by that. Like it really, and it was never lost on me, the fact that you don't know somebody who walks through the door what they're looking for. And that's the great thing that I've always felt, that being here, everybody is here because they're looking for something. And you want to be at that crossroads and help them find it. And that's always, I've felt very fortunate to be able to have that kind of position where, everybody that comes walking into my door of my office, they are looking for something. And I could go through a long list of people that, called me up, hey, I just got a job doing books on tape, and everything I needed I learned doing MC3 on the air.
Yeah.
Or, there's a guy that that I just talked to the other day. He's doing spots for a car dealership. Now his stuff is on Beasley Media. And I actually heard it on YSP. And I texted him right away. I said, I heard you tonight.
That's awesome.
And he was just, and he's like, yeah, that's me. And I was so thrilled. And, people like that, but even just, I could go through, I got 25 years in here. So it's like there's definitely people that I remember that I've met, that I still work with, that I would consider friends even, that people that I met here that have continued. And some of them have continued in this, what they studied here. Mm-hmm. Others have made sharp turns and gone on and done other things. But I always just feel like as long as they're happy in their life, that as long as this was part of that success, that's really all that I'm here for. And I have a lot of good memories of people that I met here and worked with, and I could probably count on one hand the people I would really trash, and I won't do it on a podcast. But
there's not too many of them here.
Right, there's not many.
It's pretty much all good apples here for the most part.
And if you could count them on one hand, you could count them off and make a fist, and that's about all.
That's good. Well, for my last question here, obviously you've acted as a huge mentor to so many people that have come through here with all your time here. Is there anybody here, I heard you mention Dr. Karen earlier, or Dave, is there anybody here who's acted as a mentor towards you or helped you grow or become a better mentor?
I was really lucky. One, it might sound cliche, but everybody goes back to it. My mom and dad were very supportive of me wanting to do this kind of stuff. That I was always creative, and that I always wanted to do. I wanted to be a comic book artist when I was a kid. That was my goal. I wanted to do that. And then about 1980s, 2 or 3, I was in high school, and the Penridge Media Center had a TV studio. Mm-hmm. And when you think about it at the time, there's no YouTube or anything like that. So we were actually on TV, on cable, that could go into people's houses. And the man who was running the media center, his name was Dr. Warner, he was a friend of our family. He lived up the street. And I remember him saying to me the one day, I think you should come down to the media center. You'd enjoy this. He was a mentor to me in that he really guided me on, as a student, 1 billion years ago, to come in and get engaged in this. And in a lot of ways, I feel like what I'm doing now is very similar to what I did, because then I went back and worked there for a while, which I actually ran the media center at my high school for a short stint before I was here. And he's somebody that comes from my mom and dad, Dr. Warner. Then when I got here, really my main mentor was Neil Goldstein. He left for a year when I first started, but then he came back. But Neil knew creativity, and plus he was very good at navigating the red tape. And Neil really protected us from a lot of the red tape of the rest of maybe the rest of the campus. And I learned a lot from Neil. And Neil was a great friend, and when he retired a couple years ago, but I always enjoyed working with him. Mm-hmm. And then in recent times, really somebody like David Ivory. I learned something from David Ivory every day. And a lot of time it comes down to watching the way he handles the students, but also there's 40 years worth of industry knowledge that, I, as a coworker with him, I get to absorb. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite things, just to give you kind of a very positive, the one day I needed to record the announcements for commencement. And they were simple, like, stay in your car, blah, 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 right? And they were going to be the audio announcements. And I came up here, and there was one guy working in the studio, and I said, I need you to just record these real quick. And all the mics are already set up and everything. Nah, he couldn't be bothered. And he starts giving me all these excuses why he can't be bothered. I walk into Dave, and Dave's in the mix room. I say, Dave, can you do me a favor? I got to record these real quick. And he says to me, he says, yes, of course. Okay? I wrote that down on a piece of paper. That affirmative kind of yes, of course. Mm-hmm. In the time it took for the other guy to give me excuses, Dave had a mic set up and we were done. And he's the best. And I think that working with people who are positive, somebody like Michael Kelly, who's the same way, positive, he's bringing that positivity. Dr. Stout, as a leader, when she was the college president, she was such a strong leader. It was hard not to feel her passion. Dr. Bustecki, who's our current president, I worked with her when she was the vice president of Allied Health. Mm-hmm. That's the first time I ever made a video with her, was years ago. And she's another one who's such a strong leader that you enjoy seeing how they're going to guide the college. So for me, as somebody who works here, you feel like that you're part of something bigger and greater. So I've always felt that there's been people who were mentors or just very good leaders that I could learn something from. And I've always felt very fortunate about that.
Yeah, I the same goes exactly for me. I could go on for days of what this place has done for me. And I think the number one thing is that this place helps you break down fear. It helps you break away fear. It takes it and it bends it and it twists the of it and it beats it up.
What's a moment that you can think of when you were afraid that you overcame something?
Oh my God. I probably every single time I stepped in the mix room for my first semester with Dave. I
And what was it about it that scared you?
I didn't really have too much disciplinarian figures growing up. So I was a little loose around the edges. I was always very passionate, a very hard worker. I was punctual, but there would just be little things that it's hard to even explain. Dave will say something in a tone of voice and he'll say a million things in that way. You know what I mean? And not just Dave, but Michael Kelly and Howie. It's so much encouragement here to just get your hands, burn your hand on the stove, dude. For everybody. Burn your hand on the stove. It is the best thing you can do.
You can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs.
Yeah,
you know what
just
I mean?
Don't do it more than once, because then you're dumb. If you burn your hand once, you're learning. If you burn your hand twice, you're an idiot. But I think that's. Yeah.
I think you're hitting on one thing, though. The one thing that I find, and we've always been strong in, is that you're learning by doing, hands-on. You're making projects. And I think in my mind, it's one of the things that fascinates me about talking to creative people is you have to learn a certain amount of skills to use. The more crayons in the box, the more you can do.
Yeah.
So the more skills that you have by doing it, the more you can express yourself. And a lot of time that starts off with you want to tell your story. You make money by telling somebody else's story because they don't have the skills that you have to translate that into their vision. And I think that's where the more comfortable you are and the more comfortable you are with knowing how, if somebody says, can we do this? And you say, yeah, I know how I do that. It's a lot of problem solving. And so there is that fear because sometimes you get a project and you say, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And you have to figure it out. And that's the more you know how to, the more that you can bring to a project, the more you don't have to be afraid because you say, I know how to do that. I know what we're going to do. We'll do this and this, and we'll put the camera here, we'll put the mic here.
I absolutely.
And it works.
I think about that, the way that you and Dave and the professors here are able to explain that so easily and go into things with ease. It's so evident that you guys went through all your trials and tribulations to get here. That is something I've noticed in myself, growing, being in the internship. I'm a super senior at Monco.
I love that term.
This is my fourth year. In a 3-year program. I got to work full time. Got to pay the tuition somehow. But coming here and just breaking away from this little world, breaking away from my ADHD brain and just focusing on doing stuff and being encouraged to do it. And even when I fall, just getting back up and doing it all over and over again. It's something that I'm eternally grateful that I came here and experienced with, no matter what I do going forward. I am out of questions here. Actually,
you know what,
we're having this
it's
is
funny
great
because
conversation.
as you wrapped it up, I mean, to kind of put a button on it, the thing that I listened to, your story is the story that makes it worthwhile to work here.
Absolutely.
Because you meet people, like I said earlier, you meet people that are coming here looking for something. You came here looking for something. And sometimes you don't even know what it is. But to just be a small part of helping people find it, for me, has always been very beneficial. So when you do get feedback from people, even sometimes right at commencement, sometimes 5 years down the line, sometimes 10 years down the line, that they say, I remember when you told me this or that. Or, I mean, it's even funny. I was joking with somebody the other day. If you go back and look at Rate My Professors, like I didn't even know that was still a thing, but there's one that say, oh, Matt Porter is the best, or Matt Porter taught me this or that. You know, that's not lost because you get people that you don't know the impact that you can have on somebody sometimes till later. And I think as you're describing that, the fact that you could overcome your fear, it's huge. And I think because everybody walks into it with a certain amount of trepidation. What am I doing here? What am I going to get out of this? Can I get my dream? You know, can I do what I want? And I think there are so many success stories. It's funny because as you were saying earlier, can you think of any? I can run through so many in my mind, and a lot of them, they make me really proud. You know, to be part of this great institution, to be part of something that I really do feel is a benefit to, you know, the way things are going, and people can, you know, I think it's very common anymore to say, oh, the world's so screwed up or this, other. You make the world you want, you know, and you're learning, you're here learning, you're networking with people, you're doing the things that you want to do to get to that next step. And I think that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. And that's my big goal here, you know, and I hope that, like, from what you guys have given me, I hope that with this podcast somehow going forward, I can do that for other people also. So with that being said, this has been the Melting Spot Podcast, the podcast for everybody and anybody. I'm Isaiah Fecho, your host. Thank you so much, Matt Porter, for joining me. This was awesome. I would definitely love to have you back in the future. And thank you, Dalton. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jonah, in the sound room. And yeah, awesome.